Welcome to Threads of Enlightenment, a podcast devoted to helping you overcome challenges in your life that prevent you from becoming the best version of yourself. Each episode features interviews with people from all walks of life about their journey of self-development and the principles they utilize to overcome their fears to achieve their desired outcome. Ready to be enlightened? Here's your host, Ken Primus.
Welcome to another episode of Threads of Enlightenment. As usual, it is my custom here to welcome our guests. But first, I want to say thank you for them coming, because I know they're coming with a couple of things I deem very expensive. Time. 24 hours has been offered to every one of us that are here on this planet. And Alison's here to share some of that precious commodity. And once it's spent, it is spent. And so we want to honor her for coming and spending some of this expensive stuff with us. The other is the journey. The journey is a powerful creator. It has created Alison. It's given her some things that are rich in her, and we would like access to them. And she's here to afford us access to them. What are those things? Wisdom, knowledge, science, understanding, all of those wonderful things that we want access to. Why? Because they're going to make us, you and I, better human spirits while we're here on this planet. Alison, thank you so much for coming to Threads of Enlightenment.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a delight to be here.
It's an honor. And I always ask this question because I tell people the journey is twofold, as you know, the main points, if you will. The first introduction is to the self, and one of the other is the most beautiful part is that sacred journey of interdependent relationship where we serve others. How do you serve mankind?
Well, I mean, the way that I choose to do it is to share some of the things that I've learned about how we've been doing that exact thing over the last several millennia. And luckily for us, we are a storytelling people. Human beings love to share stories. And there is a real evolutionary advantage to this. We know that if we can tell other people what we've learned, what we've experienced, they have a better chance of survival themselves. Share how we do things and what worked for us. We share the way that things failed often, and we've learned to do that in the context of telling a really good story, because that allows other people to take away what we've learned and what we experienced, what was really difficult about what we went through, and we shape it in a way that allows that to be carried on into the future. And this is what a myth is. I'm a mythologist. That is my profession. And I became a mythologist because I found these stories so fascinating, and they taught me so much about how to navigate the difficult moments of my own life, because human beings don't really change that much, right? I mean, we may not have the same exact struggle that someone from 2,000 years ago did, but we're going to face obstacles. We're going to have problems with other people. Where you're going to feel moments of pride and anger and difficult things that we have to navigate. And, you know, if we look at a story about someone going on a sea adventure across the Aegean Sea, that may not be our reality, but Odysseus would have gone through some things that were really hard that we can find a match for in our own lives. So by kind of stripping away the outside layer of that, we can get to the heart of what it means to be a human being, what it means to go through like a death of an old version of ourselves, to be reborn into a new version of ourselves, to change from where we were and become something new through transformation. And this is something that we're called to do many times in our lives. And these old stories give us a path to figuring out how to navigate that with a little bit of elegance and with some success, so that we are prepared for the next thing that is going to come at us. So for me, that is the true power of what myths have to offer. They not only entertain me and make me laugh and, you know, give me thrills, but they also really teach me how to navigate it when I have to go through something that's similar to what those old heroes had to do as well. So for me, it's fascinating, it's entertaining, it's hilarious, it's so many wonderful things, but it also really does show me and everybody that I talk to how to navigate life in a way that is going to allow us to give back from what we've learned at the end, which to me is the most sacred duty of the human life. So that it keeps me up and keeps me getting out of bed every morning, and it allows me to help other folks. And I've gotten to see the power of the transformative aspect of myths many times throughout the course of my career. And the more opportunities I have to share that with other folks that might be struggling, it's just the most delightful thing in the world to me.
I'm really fascinated to find out how a young girl turned into this powerful individual. As customs here, Alison, we go back to the beginnings of our beginnings, if you will. And that is the unit, we call it the family. And that space, that location, I always tell people, these are some of those spaces that we visit for a short time in our journey heading into quote unquote adulthood. And when we get there, we have certain tools in adulthood, but there are threads that walk with us all the way through our lives. And we love uncovering some of those things because that's where some of our trauma take place and so forth. And we have to learn how to uncover them and deal with them. The family location is full of a couple of strangers. We call them mom and dad. And some of us have brothers and sisters and stuff like that. But right here, Alison, we're going to learn a couple of skills, communication skills. We're going to learn how to deal with people and all these different types of stuff. What was your family unit like?
Well, my family was a little bit unusual. My dad was an Alaskan bush pilot, as it turned out. He was involved with the space program in California in the 1960s, and when I was a child, he wanted to live a great life of adventure. So he moved us all up to Alaska. He had gotten his pilot's license at that time. And my entire life growing up, I spent in this very mythic landscape.
Mm-hmm.
Alaska is a vast and really powerful landscape. These mountains are huge, and these animals and there's just stories of adventure that kind of traveled with me throughout my entire childhood. And my parents did divorce when I was 5. My dad had sole custody of my brother and myself, so I was around this man that was an incredible storyteller, and he had really great stories to tell. He was talking about bears getting in his face and crashing the airplane, which he did multiple times. It's kind of alarming. Just being out in the wilderness and having all these fantastic adventures. I don't know if you ever saw there's this old movie called Out of Africa, and there's this character played by Robert Redford where he's this pilot in Africa, and he's flying around and having adventures. And he very much saw himself as the Alaska version of this guy, right? Just out there charming the ladies and being a great storyteller and just so this idea that stories mattered came to me from such a young age because from him I got these stories, told, orally. And my mother was a reader, so I learned how to read from her when I was a child, very young. And this divorce that they went through was very, very difficult. I mean, they both kidnapped us, and there was all this drama going on. But for me, my solace and my place of comfort was in stories and in books. So I would just read. I was a huge bookworm as a child, so I found these myths, I found fairy tales, I found all these wonderful stories, and all of this recognition that stories mattered and that they could really be a place where you could find comfort, you could find understanding, you could learn, you could figure out what you needed to know. That came to me because of the way my family was, because we valued storytelling so deeply from all these different aspects that recognizing that stories were something that was an important part of human life was always with me in the family that I came out of. So that was how I got here. And we call that our creation myths in the context of the work that I do. So what is your creation myth? Where are your family from? Where's your family from? How were you made in your creation, in your family? So
and there you go. There's the thread that is able to guide you through your life. And every one of us have it. I tell people, if you stay quiet and begin to investigate yourself, you will notice it. It's there, and it is there to guide you and to walk with you through your life. And in many ways, it'll manifest in so many different forms, if you will. So here you are, Alison. What a beginning, if you will, to have that. And amongst that, you have mom and dad kidnapping. That's a story in itself within your stories.
I kind of blew past that, didn't I? I kind of blew past that one.
So you have a bunch of stories within the stories there. And so I'm sure within all of those stories, this young individual is being traumatized in many different ways and being pulled in all kinds of directions. And from what you say that she found her solace within those books, within the myths, within the stories and so forth. And that's where she began to gain her comfort and get her protection, get her security, all the different things that one needs. As I tell people, when we are traumatized, we begin to do certain things to help us to manage, and survival mode, the first stage of this thing. We find ways to survive, and you survived in the books. Alison, you're growing up. You are now getting older. Alaska introduces us to the space because school system, how is that set up there? Most of us are now familiar with some place that is so far away from us, if you will, from the others. How is that set up as far as your high school? And what was your relationship with others outside of the family, having all of these interesting, traumatizing stories to talk about on a personal level? What was your communication skills with yourself and with
Yeah.
others.
Well, I mean, I don't think that my high school was all that different from, say, the high school that my two sons go to right now. I mean, it was a pretty similar experience. I mean, it's a regular community. It's, there's thousands of people that live in Alaska. It wasn't a very small village, or, wasn't only accessible by airplane or anything like that. There were roads, there were stores. I mean, it's not that different. But I will tell you this part of it that I find fairly interesting. So my dad was, you've heard, this bush pilot, very enamored of hunting and fishing and flying and all of these wonderful adventure things. And he was very, very attached to his kind of masculine way of seeing the world. And because my mother hurt him by leaving him, any aspect of myself that was kind of slightly feminine was punished and was not
Hmm.
really allowed. So I was living in this home with this very masculine centered philosophy, if you will, of, this is what matters in the world, this is what's valuable in the world, this is what we like, and any kind of sense of the self, if for me as a young woman that was feminine, was not really allowed.
Hmm.
The way that I dealt with that was really difficult. I mean, I was, we were Christian, we were going to this church that was also very male centric. The men are in charge, and the women need to defer to the men and support the men. And so this way of looking at the world was really ingrained in me from the time I was a really small child. So the way that I found solace was in my group of friends in high school and middle school. I had a group of young women that became my friends, and to me, being in their homes, being around their mothers, gave me a sense of what feminine energy felt like. And it really drew me toward an understanding of the sacred feminine, which I was able to find in mythology later. There wasn't a
Yeah.
lot of room in evangelical Christianity in my childhood for any sense of the sacred and the feminine.
Yeah.
So that was a huge need for me growing up, to find where I could see myself in the sacred. And that was a guiding principle for me. And it has been, I mostly work with women in my work, and to find the power of stories about goddesses and their actions and how they look like my life, that was something that I had a real hunger for as a young woman. And, in this friend group, and then going into college, there was a lot of women in my college. So I was able to kind of find my path through into a feminine life. And I didn't have to kind of pretend to be this masculine oriented person, which was
Yeah.
what was required of me when I was living in my father's house. I had to find this way toward being a woman is okay. I don't have
Hmm.
to just be this kind of lesser than version of a man, which
Yeah.
was a
Yeah.
little bit of what I was taught as a child. And so that for me was a very much, as I was getting older, like, how can I find access to the sacred feminine? How can I recognize it in myself? How can I recognize my own feminine nature? So for me, that was the next stage coming out of my first part of my childhood, was how can I
Uh-huh.
connect with that? That was a huge part of my journey.
Wow. And
Yeah.
when you're heading there, and you mentioned that you gravitated towards women and as friends and their mom and so forth, when you were heading into college, Alison, and which college did you pick, and what field of study did you pick?
So I ended up attending a Christian college. It's in Santa Barbara, California. It's called Westmont College. It's in
Hmm.
Montecito. And my dad's family was from Santa Maria, California, which is about an hour away from Santa Barbara. So it was close to the family. And again, at that time, I mean, my dad was my hero, and I had him on a pedestal for
Yeah.
many, many years. And that changed later, and we had to work through some things. But, at
Yeah.
that time, at least, I was, and it was a beautiful school. And Santa Barbara is a beautiful town. Felt like we were going to a resort or something. So I was still kind of enmeshed in this framework of evangelical Christianity at that time. But there were a lot of women there. There was, it was a very imbalanced male female gender ratio,
Yeah.
probably three quarters women, young women versus the men. So just lots and lots of women around. And I'm living with them. I'm, going to class with them. I'm with them all the time. So that gave me access to a purely feminine space, which I had never really had outside of my little friend group. And that, and again, a lot of what I had to learn about story and myth and even the sacred feminine itself, I didn't get to until I was out of that environment, because it still was
Hmm.
very much, centered on the masculine, because that's, in certain parts of the Christian religion, that is how it's structured, right?
Yeah.
Depending on the community, right? So I was still a believer. I was still worshiping Jesus and God and all of that, and holding the sacred masculine in the center of my spiritual self. And that did change for me a bit later, but at that time I was still trying to just be okay with, like, it's okay to like the things that I like that aren't hunting and fishing and fly
Yeah.
fishing and,
Yeah.
and all of those kind of masculine things that my dad was into. He would have loved it if I had been really into all that and stayed in Alaska and married a guy just like him, but that was not my path. And so what I studied, he asked me what my form of study was. It was English. English literature was my major, but I came out of that environment. I didn't know what to do with that. I struggled for
Yeah.
a really long time. Like, what do you do with a bachelor's degree in English if you're not going on
Yeah.
to graduate school or something? But eventually I found my way. So it allowed me to study great stories
Hmm.
and to have conversations about them and to understand why they were powerful and why they mattered to people and why we were still reading them. And, whatever it was that I was learning from Shakespeare or Charles Dickens or, whoever I was reading, they had things that I needed to learn from their stories. It wasn't mythology, but it was
Yeah.
still I talk about this in my work a little bit, this idea that, any author, any creator of any kind of human work is going to, they have all of their threads that they're working with in their lives. They've
Hmm.
got their influences of their childhood and the people that they know and the thoughts that they think and the books that they read. And they're able to produce this work that comes out of a lot of hardship for them. And this is a gift that comes out of their trauma. They've been able to transform it into something that's really beautiful and lasting as part of the human experience. So I was very hungry for all of that. I really wanted to understand how we can make beauty out of the most difficult moments of our lives. And this was a very unspoken desire at that time. And I've come to
Yeah.
understand it much more now. But we have this, right? We have this way of in human life of taking the most difficult moments in our lives, the greatest moments of trauma, the greatest moments of pain, and through this kind of magical alchemy, we can take it and make it into something that's beautiful. We can make music, we can make
Yeah.
art, we can make literature. And there's this beautiful word in Spain that comes out of the Romani tradition. I don't know if you know it. It's the word duende.
Doing it. Yeah.
And do you know duende, right? So it's this idea that, we soak the earth with our blood and our tears, pull that energy back up through ourselves, and we dance it out in the flamenco,
Yeah.
or, we produce it out of the Spanish guitar. So we're transforming pain into art and into beauty and into something that's really awe-inspiring and uplifting to anyone else that hears it or reads it or sees it. And to me, what an extraordinary thing that is, that a
Yeah.
human being can do that they can take pain and transmute it into something that is so lasting and powerful that centuries after we've died, it still is bringing meaning and succor and solace to the people that read it or watch it or whatever. I mean, how extraordinary is that? I mean, that we can do
Yeah.
that. So by centering that, I think, okay, maybe I can do that too. Maybe all of
Hmm.
these moments of pain, maybe that kidnapping and all of that trauma from my childhood, or the ways that I wasn't allowed to be feminine, or any other moment in my life that's happened. And there have been other moments of trauma that have happened since then. How can I center that impulse? How can I take all of that pain and make it into something that can be shareable with somebody else, that can be of service to somebody else, that might help them when they go through their moments of pain, so that they can manage it and they can then produce something for someone else to help? And this continuity of human transformation, to be a part of that chain, is to me the greatest gift, right? That I get to do that I get to
Yeah.
read the stories of other people, that these myths or anything else, they can help me manage what I need to manage. It'll allow me to produce this thing that now can help somebody else. And then somebody else can pick it up and say, okay, I'm going to use this and I'm going to manage to do the same. And then we continue on into the future.
That is the journey, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. To me, it's so magical. It's just the best thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love celebrating that. And that's why I get an opportunity to hear all these stories. Everyone's journey, these interviews that I do, is a celebration of that. And so I want those that are listening will understand that they can do the same thing. We are so powerful that we have the ability to convert pain, the darkest of pain that a human being can ever feel and ever encounter, into the most beautiful art. And it's in our ability, but we have to understand that it's in our ability to do that. And once we
Absolutely.
understand
Right.
that, then we are able to not let it overcome us, but for us to overcome it. As you were studying all of these and inputting all the data from all the different sources in your life, you mentioned Hemingway and a couple of Shakespeare and a few all those, collecting data. On the dealing with the feminine side of you, what did you read that began to impact you on that side? What data did you find, whether you read it or from encounters that you had with others, that started to, because that's you're female,
Yeah.
and you well, that's you have been taught that that ain't good stuff. You need to so you need to be reintroduced to that part of you. How are you being reintroduced? Yeah, you're hanging out with ladies, yeah, but you still have to be reintroduced. You could hang out with them and not collect anything, Allison, because you're so deeply programmed, but you have to really begin to integrate these things into you. What and how did you start to do that?
Well, I was always a reader, as I've already mentioned, and there are some wonderful books out there that can help with this kind of thing. One that was important for me as I was going through this process in my late 20s, early 30s was called Women Who Run with the Wolves. It's a classic book that
Hmm.
came out in the late 90s, or I'm sorry, early 90s, and by a Jungian analyst. And she was this beautiful storyteller, and she would tell a myth, and then she would talk about how it really matters in our lives and how that story shows up. So, like she tells the story of the ugly duckling and how you might not feel like you belong in your family of origin and what that means. And to me, that had a huge amount of resonance because I was in this environment where, if you're an adventurous type person to sit on a riverbank and fish or, hunt bears or whatever, it's exciting. But for me, I wanted a different kind of life for myself. So to find my way out of this, I didn't accept the life that I was given as a child. I made something new. So understanding that story, it's not even a myth. It's a fairy tale. It's a written fairy tale by Hans Christian Andersen, right? It's not this ancient thing that's come down through millennia. It's a one person's piece of art. So if you understand, okay, maybe it's all right that I'm not the same as everyone around me. Maybe I need to go and find a new community. And maybe that's so, learning from something like that. And then eventually I did start reading myths. And there is one incredibly powerful myth for women that I work with quite a lot. It comes to us out of Mesopotamia. It's called the Descent of Inanna. And Inanna was a Sumerian goddess, and she decides to go into the underworld. And she has this journey of going down into the underworld, being killed in the underworld, and then being resuscitated and coming back. And it's such a powerful story because it shows us what we have to go through and what steps we're going to be expected to take when we go into these dark places in our lives and how we can reascend out of them. And what it just really tells us everything we need to know. But it is a myth. It requires a little bit of intuition, thought, interpretation. So, it's still something that I work with even now in my own life. Like it has things to teach me. And, one of the things I love about it is, myths are so powerful because you can read all of the myths of a culture. It's a very vast scope of work, if you will, but you can also really drill down into individual phrases or even individual words and really glean a lot of meaning out of it. So in the Descent of Inanna, the very first line of that myth is Inanna turned her ear to the great below. Okay. So she has made this decision to go into the underworld. And what's interesting about that is these stories came to us. We've only known about them for about 100 years. They were found on written in cuneiform on clay tablets
Hmm.
in an archaeological dig in the Middle East. Okay. So now they've been translated, and the cuneiform symbol for ear, as it turns out, is the same as the word for wisdom. So when we know that, now we're getting a little bit of an insight into what this story is really about, right? So we can say, okay, it's time for me to turn my ear, turn my hearing for wisdom, for learning, and for seeking toward this deep and dark place that I'm going to have to go into and be tried by and even be killed by. And then I'm going to be a different person. I'm going to reemerge from that transformed and ready to go on and do that sharing, right? So even just that one word, right? I mean, we can have a whole conversation. We could probably talk an entire podcast about that one symbol and really have this wonderful conversation, right? So the fact that myth could do that really blew my mind, right? Like,
Yeah.
okay, and there's thousands of these,
Yeah.
and they're not being studied like this, right? Not
Yeah.
really, not widely.
Hmm.
So we read the Bible, or we read the stories of the Torah or whatever. Like we read sacred texts, but these stories that have been with us for so long are neglected in this way. They're not studied in this way. So for me, it felt like such an amazing wellspring of learning what I needed to learn. And then eventually, once I got my feet wet a little bit, to be able to start to share that and say, okay, you're struggling. You're in a very difficult moment. And I do believe that this is true. We have a choice that we make when we are going through something difficult. Most people will choose to survive it. They will
Hmm.
hunker down. They will protect themselves. They will kind of hide. That is the natural instinct when we're afraid or when something feels like it's more than we can handle. But there is another choice, and that choice is transformation. And this is
Hmm.
what our heroic journeys tell us and show us in myths is I didn't make the choice to merely survive it. I'm going to actually step into a heroic role. I'm going to pull the archetype of the hero onto myself, and I'm going to find the bravery that I need and all of the tools that I need by doing so. And I'm going to actually go through this. And this is the thing that allows us to bring something out on the other side, right? If you just survive, you're not going to be really changed by your experience. You might still
Yeah.
be alive, but you're
Hmm.
not changed by it. You haven't pulled anything out of it that you have now to share. But, when we look at heroic journeys, we see that there is a confrontation with some kind of monster, a
Hmm.
dragon or something. And in the way that I kind of talk about it often is, okay, you've encountered your dragon, maybe you defeated the dragon, but it is possible, in fact, to turn into the dragon yourself if you are not willing to share that horde on. If you take the horde of the dragon, you need to give it back out to the community. And if you don't
Hmm.
do that, you are going to become the dragon yourself, right? If you
Yeah.
hold onto your horde, if you hoard it, if you hoard your
Yeah.
horde, then you're going to be
Yeah.
stuck there just as much as if you had not gone through everything that you've gone through before. So we have an obligation. You were talking about this earlier, right? Like, how do I share that on? How do I be of service to somebody else? And the way that you do that is you take everything that you've learned, everything that you've been through, and you find a way to share it forward to help somebody else in their hour of need. And that is the completion of the journey. That is the completion of the transformation. Now you're in a position where you are ready to be the mentor for somebody else's journey, or be the ally, or just be the helping hand that somebody else needs along the way. And for me, that's the best part, right? So
That's the
go
fun
ahead.
part, I think.
Yeah.
And you're so right, Alison, that so many, and I've met many of them. I worked in a skilled nursing facility in the latter part of my, corporate lifestyle, if you will, corporate life. And I met many of them that hunkered down and did not pick up the hero's mantle. And it was very painful to engage in the conversation, because you'll know it just in a couple of minutes by having those conversations. And the reasons that they do, and they will say to you why they hunker down: family, the kids, all of these different, the marriage. You'll hear the list of why they hunkered down and didn't become that hero and began to face some of those dragons. But the purpose of facing all those dragons and coming out on the other side, as I mentioned to you, is that we have the ability to synchronize all the things that we've learned into a format as this heroes coming out to fit us, our way by now, which we are going to regurgitate our story, our myth, if you will. And when we speak our myth, it is true. And when we speak truth, our truth, it is power. It is going, the other individual that is about to hear it, when we speak it, is going to ignite them and lift them up, because they're going to say, wow, there's something, how he's delivering this particular story, it's a little different. Why? Because it's personal. They went through this, and it's something that they know. And so that individual that hears it now has an opportunity to make some decisions. Hey, I'm sitting in the midst of mine. He or she has given me some additional data that can allow me to become that hero in my story. So, and that's the purpose, I believe, Alison, why we go through all this stuff, so that we could come out, because someone out is waiting for us to come back and grab them and bring them along. So here you are, man. I love your life. It's getting fun. But, there's a part in there that I want to investigate a little.
Yeah, sure.
And that part, Allison, is you're in school, you got your degree, you're
Yeah.
teaching and stuff like that. There's this big gap right in there that is a school of hard knocks, as they say. You go through all kinds of stuff. Life has a way to come and greet you and say, hey, I've been waiting for you, and rough you up a little. Talk to us about that little area, that little gap there, because that roughing up is about gaining insight, is practical knowledge, if you will. Talk to us about that when you came out and you were bouncing around and find your space, because a lot of people are there, Alison. A lot of people,
Yeah, yeah.
and they're not finding their space, and they're coming out with language like, I don't belong, I don't fit in, and they're escalating this thing and wanted to do all kinds of harmful things to themselves and so forth. Um, let's linger here a little, Alison, as to
Yeah, of
when
course.
you came out. You have your degree. Many of those that are listening, you got your degree, but there's no direction. You're not hooked up to anything. What was that like, Alison? And for you, number one, what were some of those challenges that you came your way, and how did you begin to start to exit out of that?
Yeah. Well, okay. So for me, it was the entire decade that I was in my 20s. It was really
Mm,
hard.
yeah.
And I graduated with this degree. The school that I had attended was quite expensive and probably a little bit more expensive than our family could afford. My dad was big on image and he wanted me to go to this fancy school in Santa Barbara. So I did. And I walked out of there with a ton of debt and no real prospects as far as work. I was very, very, very poor. I mean, very close to homelessness at any given month, right?
Yeah.
Just one car accident or health problem away from really struggling. And I didn't know what to do with myself. I mean, I had an English degree and I was not working. I was not using that degree at all. I was working for a bank, managing their swing shift, the people that process the checks. And that was an interesting job. It was very challenging. I learned a lot, but I was making $24,000 a year, man, and it was hard. This was in the 90s, and that was still not very much money back in the
Yeah.
90s. And, so I was struggling to survive, honestly. I mean, I was collecting cans and selling them and selling my blood. And I mean, just all the things you do when you're broke, broke, broke.
Yeah. Yeah.
But here's what I knew. This is what I got from the time I was 3 years old. There's always going to be solace in books, right?
Hmm.
So all of this time, I'm working in this very challenging environment. I'm broke, but I was reading and reading and reading because that was all I knew to do to make myself feel better. And that's actually not the worst way to handle it, right? I mean, I
Yeah.
wasn't using drugs. I wasn't drinking a lot. I wasn't
Yeah.
sleeping around a ton. I wasn't, doing anything that might have caused me real harm. My crack, if you will, was books.
Yeah.
And if you're going to figure out your path, finding it, some of the books were stupid and they were not
Hmm.
really helpful, but some of them were amazing. And eventually I got out of that job and I started, this was kind of the beginning. This was maybe the late 90s. And the tech world was just sort of starting to come out. And I always liked writing. I wanted to write. So, and I'd written a lot of things for my group at the bank, and I was able to secure a job as a technical writer
Hmm.
working for a company called Adobe. I don't know if you're familiar with
Yeah.
Adobe. They have Photoshop and other
Hmm.
programs of this kind. So I left my home in Portland, Oregon. I moved to Seattle, which is where I still live, and I started working in the tech field. And that gave me a little bit more freedom because I was making a little bit more money. I was able to travel a little bit. I was able to go to the Louvre and see all of the amazing art there. And that was another learning thing for me, right? So I was able to kind of expand my horizons beyond just books that were, right in front of my nose. And eventually I found the work of a guy named Joseph Campbell. And I don't know if you're familiar with Campbell's work, but he wrote Hero with a Thousand Faces and The Masks of God. And I was looking for my next step. I knew that I wanted to do more with my life, but I didn't know what it was. But I read Campbell, and he was combining not only literature, but philosophy and psychology and anthropology and the study of religion and all of these wonderful fields, all in the context of talking about myths. And it just, boy, it was like a lightning bolt went off in my life at that time. I spent a year reading every Campbell book I could find. And I know exactly what year it was. It was 2000 because I was 30 years old and I was still working at Adobe. And every lunch break, every evening, I was reading and reading and reading. And by the time I was done, then I was reading Carl Jung's work, and then I was reading Nietzsche, and then I was reading Adler and Freud and, all of these writers. And for me, that was it. Like it was, sometimes you just know, right?
Yeah.
You find something and you say, this is where I belong. And so then things really started cooking in my life. Like I went on this long backpacking trip and was traveling for a while. And when I came back, I was at a retreat center in Big Sur in California for a while called Esalen
Hmm.
Institute. And being in that environment allowed me to, and the reason I went there is because Campbell had gone there. He had taught
Yeah.
there when he was alive, and I wanted to experience it. And it was absolutely transformative for me. Sometimes physically moving your body to a new place
Hmm.
can be everything, right? And
Yeah.
for me, traveling and just being outside of my normal environment and just backpacking around on the cheap for a few months and then going to Esalen, it absolutely changed everything for me. And then the next thing that happened after that, like this was the thing that broke open my life because within a year I met my husband. We're celebrating our 20th anniversary this summer. We're in a very happy
Congratulations.
marriage. So now the husband's here, right? This, and then shortly after, so then the same year that my husband and I got engaged, I started graduate school and they have a program actually back in Santa Barbara called the
Hmm.
Pacific Graduate Institute, and they have a master's and PhD in mythology in the context of Carl Jung's work. So it's mythological studies in depth psychology. So I was
Yeah.
in college studying, studying Jung in a new way, reading all these myths, reading the Odyssey, reading African myths, reading Aboriginal myths, reading Native American. I mean, just anything. And I was just so thirsty for it. Just give me, give me, give me, give me.
Hmm.
And then here now I've got two children, and I spent years while I'm raising them, sharing, optimizing everything that I was hearing, creating new work out of that, writing, speaking, teaching, leading retreats. And that's been the course of my career. But that moment in 2000, when I read just the right book that alchemized everything that he had learned in just the right way, allowed me to find my path and showed me just where I wanted to work and where I wanted to be. And it's been incredibly powerful for me. It gave me a sense of purpose. Campbell's work does affect people this way sometimes.
Yeah.
I had taught Campbell for a long time through the auspices of the Joseph Campbell Foundation.
Yeah.
And I met a lot of people that came out. I mean, a lot of people that came out of evangelical Christianity that left their churches behind and were trying to find meaning after that outside the context of their church. So, sometimes Campbell really catches people that are coming out of that environment. So
Hmm.
we had a lot of conversations in those classes and in those meetings about how do we do all of this? How do we go on our heroic journeys? How do we learn from that? How do we share what we've learned? So really that was it. That was the pivot point of my life to
Yeah.
find that particular book. For me, it was okay. So he has a series called The Masks of God. It's a 4-book series, and it's like primitive, and then you go Western, Eastern, and then kind of more modern. It's all the ways that we see God.
Hmm.
And, I was really interested in that from the way I grew up. I mean, I was a huge believer when I was a young person in the Christian religion. And I lost some of the outside edges of that when I got older. But to be able to recognize what the sacred means in human life, what it means for human psychology, why it matters to have experiences of the holy, and how that looks in different cultures. I mean, that was really powerful for me. And it allowed me to have a sense of my own spiritual life, even though I wasn't going to the same kind of church I used to as a child.
Yeah. That transformation happened to me as well. I
Mm.
remember because I grew up in the church when I grabbed old Campbell and Nietzsche and all these guys, and I began to study and read and different things. I tell people books, and that's why I always alert my audience to purchase books, and we'll provide the links for them to get everything you have, Alison. Because tell
Wonderful.
them between the walls of the covers lies wisdom,
Yeah.
things, phrases, sentences, paragraphs, stuff that will set you free. And there is a way to approach a book, and you will receive from it if you approach a book. How you approach a book, I tell people, is just as important as anything else. Now, you need to find that space by which you are now going to put yourself into a place by which one can receive from the book. The mind has the ability to, and science is proving all of these things, the theta waves, the delta waves, and all these different things, and what they do and how they do it, and how one receives. And so you can do that. You can put your mind in those states and in those ways by how you treat yourself. You have your right lighting, your coffee, your tea. And as you are doing all of these things, you're stepping into a state that causes you to be receptive. So when you begin to open the walls of those books and you begin to partake, and I tell people this, and some people laugh at me, but if you get it, you get it. You are what you eat. And they think of food, but you are what you eat. And I'm talking about what you read, what you watch. You are what you eat. Be mindful of what you say to yourself because you are listening. And once you believe it, it is truth. So here you are. I love your space that you had and how life, and I tell people, the reason why I love to talk about those spaces, Alison, because the synchronicity of the pull, the thread that had you from a little girl begins to make those knots, those threads, if you will, to get it you a little tighter, to pull you to where you ought to be. And you laid it out there as you're telling me it, I'm watching you just being pulled by those threads and placed you in the exact place that you needed to be on this planet. I hope you guys are listening to me for 1 minute. You did not come here to do a job. You came here, you have an assignment. You really do. You have to locate your assignment. And I usually use this, Alison, because it illustrates plainly what I'm talking about. And it's a story from the Bible. Jesus is walking. We have these fishermen, Peter, and he's in the boat. He's doing his job. And, I'm sure they had the conversation they're having, talking about, hey, I don't think we can go lateral. I don't know if they can get a promotion. I think this is it. This is the end of it right here. And this guy comes up and he says, hey, follow me and I'll make you fishers of men. They don't even know what that means. I don't. But, Alison, it must have done something inside of them because they jumped out of there and they started following him. And so they were working, and he said, leave your job. I have an assignment for you. We are here on this planet to do an assignment. And when you're in your assignment, and I tell people your assignment is capable of sustaining you just like that job. Don't be fooled by the programmers and say that your assignment can't sustain you. That is a lie. Your assignment can sustain you even more so because it is where you belong. So here you are, you found yourself, you're studying all the masters, if you will, and gaining such insight. What happened to Alison?
Okay, so I will tell you that it allowed me to come out of that difficult period of my 20s that I've already described. I was in a new marriage, I was a new mother, and it gave me the tools that I needed to navigate everything about that was challenging. It made my marriage stronger. Now my husband is a wonderful man. He's an engineer, and I'm obviously a talker, right? He's a much quieter person than I am, and we're figuring out how to live together and how to be in a relationship with each other. And some of this work, as I was developing my work in those early years, we started working with archetypes, which we haven't even really discussed much yet, but we started looking at archetypes that might be influencing us. And he was a good sport about it. He was willing to kind of do some of this with me, and it showed me some things about himself that he was not able to articulate. Like, for example, okay, so I was, as I said, in grad school when we were married. It was halfway through my graduate program, and after we were married, I was in my late 30s, and I was thinking that I wanted to have children soon. And when I started doing the archetype work, I was seeing the mother archetype coming up in a lot of aspects of my life. So I knew that it was on my mind. I wanted to have children. I didn't know if I was going to be able to. I mean, you just don't know, right? And then I did some archetype work with him. And what the archetypes showed me was that he was still kind of in the aspect of the lover. So, we fell in love very quickly. We had this beautiful romance. We still do 20 years on. But all of the romance that came with finding the love of your life and getting engaged and having your wedding and all of those things. I mean, it was a really wonderful and powerful experience for both of us, but he was still really reveling in that. And, I knew that he would be a wonderful father, and he is. He's a wonderful father, but he was still really enjoying and wanting to be in that moment of being the lover.
Yeah.
And he would never in a million years have been able to articulate that in a conversation. So by having that archetype come up, I was able to say, okay, I can see something that's happening with you that you wouldn't be able to tell me otherwise. And it allowed me to give him, the grace that he needed to, and also to remember that I was in the liver too, that I was still, I didn't have to rush through that part. We don't have to rush into the baby thing. We can just enjoy each other for a little bit longer. And, we still are to this day, 20 years later, right? So, and that taught me a lot. Like, okay, there are things about this work that are going to make our marriage better. There are things about looking at these myths and looking at these rituals and looking at these archetypes that are going to make me a better mother. Now, I mentioned this earlier. My mother and father divorced when I was 5. My mother was absent from my life from then until I turned 30, and we'd started to develop a relationship at that time. That was another thing that happened when I turned 30. So that was a big part of it. But I didn't have a lot of experience with mothers. And I was really afraid, am I going to be a bad mother? Am I going to be good at how am I going to do this if I've never experienced it? But I figured it out through the help of all of these stories and all of this that I was able to pull in. And my children my oldest son's 18, my younger son's 15. They're really great young men, and they're doing really well. They're both happy, and if they consider me to be a good mother at least. So despite not having had it, I was able to figure it out, and this was what I turned to learn. Right? There's a lot of stories about mothers. Some of them are terrible mothers, some of them are great mothers, but I was able to learn from all of that to find the thing that I never had myself through these stories so that I could successfully parent them. So, these are the things that I leaned on, I knew that I needed to offer them something better than what I had had. So I was really desperate to find a way, and this was the way that I found. So it worked for me, and it's been the work of my life now to share that on, because it's these stories are here for all of us, right? It's
Yeah.
we can read any story, any myth that we want, and interpreting them is where we get into the trick, right? So I consider that to be my role in facilitating this: is how can I help you read whatever myth makes the most sense to you, figure out what it has to offer you and what it has to teach you about what you need to do next, and allow you to figure out your life. And this tool is here for you, just like it was.
Alison, there's so many, because this planet has been, such an old planet, billions of years old. There's so many stories and myths that are all around, and they're finding more and more data, making
Mhm.
us, aware of them. Remember, the Dead Sea Scroll opened up into another set
Mhm.
of myths as well, and stories there about the Nephilims and all the different other creatures and different things, and all so many coming, and more being on earth
Mhm.
as as each day pass. All these studies that you've done, you talk about the archetype and so forth. When you began to put this work together, let's delve into that, since you
Yeah.
brought it up. All these stories out there, so many of them. How did you begin to now make it practical for us in 2025, in this current timeline that we
Mhm.
are in, from back then when we were talking about the myth of, all the different Greek gods and
Mhm.
all of those other myths from different cultures and stuff like that? How does that bring us some insight into some of these archetypes that we can relate to in our lifetime, in our story, like we're able to help you out in your marriage and so forth?
Mhm.
Introduce us to some of those things through individuals, or however you want to make us aware of that. Talk to us about some of them that you discovered, that you saw and use in your practice, as you say, and get results.
Well, I mean, the truth is that I often do work with myths that are fairly new to me, that I haven't had a chance to really think through yet. But that's part of what I do when I do coaching with people, is we will work with whatever myth makes the most sense. But often when I'm not doing that kind of intensive one-on-one work with someone, I will turn to some of the myths that have had the most meaning for me, and I'll share on what I've learned about them. So one of the stories that I particularly love out of the Greek tradition is the story of Ariadne. And Ariadne is a complicated mythic system, has a very complicated mythic system around her. She was the daughter of the king of Crete, whose name was Minos, and she was the sister of the Minotaur. And her story is really fascinating, but it also relatively closely mirrors the story and life of many, many modern women. So she's a young princess. She's living there. She's a prisoner of her father. He's a very powerful man at the time. And this fellow comes in, and what they were doing is they were bringing Athenian youth in and sacrificing them to the Minotaur as a way to show power over the Athenians, because the Athenians were subjugated by the Cretans at that time. So this young man comes in with that group, and he is the son of the king of Athens. His name is Theseus, and they fall in love with each other. And she's going to help him navigate the labyrinth that the Minotaur lives in. So she gives him this ball of red thread, and it allows him to navigate through the labyrinth, kill the Minotaur, and they are able to make their escape. Right now, I'm glossing over a million different details that are really powerful and interesting here in the context of time. But if you're interested in Ariadne, I would encourage anybody to read up on her more. But what happens to her that I find particularly interesting is they escape Crete and they go to the island of Naxos, which exists in the Mediterranean. You can visit it. It's a lovely, lovely island. And what he does is he leaves her behind. He leaves her on the beach and abandons her and goes back to Athens on his own. He doesn't want to take her back to Athens. He reneges on his promise to her to marry her and take her back to Athens to be the queen. And you see this very, very often, this moment captured in classical art. There's a million paintings of this moment. They always choose this moment. She's on the beach, alone, asleep. It is always in the background. You can see the ocean. You can see the ship going off into the distance, right? And if you were to Google the word Ariadne, you would see painting after painting of this exact moment, right? But this thing that happens to her next is really fascinating, because we have a god that is a part of the Greek pantheon, and his name is Dionysus. And he is the god of ecstasy. He is the god of wine. And he is a really, really interesting part of the Greek pantheon. He finds her on the beach and he marries her. She becomes his wife, and he is the only one of all of the Greek gods that remains loyal to his wife for the rest of their marriage, which, she's immortal and he's not. So she eventually does die. She's put up into the heavens as a constellation. Okay, so what is it about this particular story that is interesting? Now, I have learned that a lot of women have a Theseus in their lives, right? They have an early marriage or an early relationship where we give away a lot of our power in the service of this young man, right? So I had it when I was young before I was married. Maybe you help your husband go through medical school or law school. You take care of the children. You take care of the household. This is what I was taught as a child, right? This is why this myth
Yeah.
resonates for me. Give all of your power over to the support of your husband or your father, right? This is what your job is. Help the men, support the men. This message was very strong in my childhood. And so, okay, so now she's done this, right? She's like, I'm going to help you. You're not going to succeed without me. I'm going to give you. So this red thread is a symbol, right? It's women's wisdom, it's intuition, it's a lot of things like that. She gives him from the feminine what he needs to succeed in his task. And we have more than one story like this in Greek mythology.
Yeah.
Of a hero that cannot do what he has to do without the input of the woman in his life. We have it in Medea and Jason, and Jason and the Golden Fleece, right? You see this, the story happens in this pattern. So she has given him the tools he needs to be successful, and she's left behind. Okay. So this is something that women resonate with because they recognize that they poured all of their, we're trained to be nice. We're trained to be supportive. So you've got a partner, and sometimes young men find it difficult to figure themselves out when they're young, and young women will pour into them and support them. And then they get to a point in their life when that relationship has now failed. And that moment is challenging. How do you figure out what's next? I work with a lot of women that are around my age that are dealing with their kids growing up and moving out. And that can be a really challenging thing. Like, what do I do with the rest of my life? How do I manage? I did all the things I was supposed to do. I got the husband, I got the kids, I got the house, I got the job. I did all of those things that were expected to do. And then you get to a point in midlife and all of that has either been accomplished or whatever, and you don't know what to do next. And Dionysus, he's this god that marries Ariadne, but he's also a symbol of what comes next. Because he's the god of ecstasy, because he is the god of transformation through the ecstatic experience, that gives us a little bit of a clue into what it means to navigate that last part of your life. After you've gone through all of that, what do you have to offer? And for me, I really do see this is that the third act of life is a time of profound meaning, and it's a very sacred and spiritual time because you've done all of those things. And now it's time to turn toward, you have that death at the end of your life, right? You're moving toward that. And, as you were talking about earlier on, this is a moment of transition. And I do really believe this. Like, if you work with myth enough and if you understand the path that you have through these deaths and resurrections of your own life, by the time you actually get to your actual death at the end, you will not be afraid. You will understand what it is because you've done it so many times. It's a familiar friend. You know that you don't need to be afraid because you've practiced it a million times in your life. If you start to recognize that that's what is happening to you, you're just in training for this big, profound moment at the very end. It takes all the fear and all of the anxiety out of that moment. So, if I do anything with this work to show people that everything that happens to you in your life is preparing you for that moment, there's no need to be afraid, right? There's something very powerful happening to you in that moment. If you've done everything that you need to do, you've left behind this legacy of treasure that you're passing on. You've done all of that transformative work. So now you get to do this at the end. So that last bit of life, when you're in that Dionysus relationship, and it doesn't have to be a literal new marriage or anything. This is all symbolic, right? If we understand that this is not a literal action, this is all symbolic. What is Dionysus for you? What does that mean? Does that mean now you're going to go volunteer at a homeless shelter or at the animal shelter? What are you going to do to give back? How are you going to write your book? Are you going to start to make your paintings and start to exhibit them? Are you going to create a cookbook of all your recipes that you've developed over the years? Are you going to just talk to people at the bus stop and share something that they need to know next? I mean, it doesn't have to be a great work of art. I don't want people to feel intimidated by that, right? You don't have to become the next Shakespeare or the next Leonardo da Vinci in order to give something back. You don't have to be afraid like that. You have something to offer. And even if it's just some small moment, you never know when you're going to be the pivot point in somebody else's life, right? You have something to offer to somebody else. They're going to need that. And it's going to be the thing that helps them get through. as we've been talking about this entire time, right?
Yeah.
So that particular myth, I love to work with that because it has so much richness, like the Inanna myth that I was talking about before. It has so
Yeah.
much richness of exploration, and we can find everybody has had that experience, most women at least. And so they recognize themselves in this story, and it allows us to get on to the next stage of what needs to be learned.
Alison, and thank you, man. Thank you so much for coming to Threads of Enlightenment. I want to bring you back, and if you are willing to do that, and next time I'd like
Absolutely.
to just welcome you and let you loose and let you go into all those myths and all of
Oh,
the
there's so
different
much more to tell you. I mean,
relationships.
I didn't even touch half of it.
I offer you an invitation to come back because
Okay, thank you.
I envision you coming back and just, hey, this is Alison. Here you go, boom, and just giving it to you, giving you the mic, and let's
I love that.
enjoy the ride and just give you the floor and let you just go. If you would indulge us with that, with a second
Of course.
invite to come and sit
I would
down
be
with us
delighted. Yes, absolutely. I will
to
come
to
back anytime you
really
like. Mhm.
go deeper in this part of it because I'm very fascinated with your knowledge because as I said on the onset, I've done this. I have 900 and something plus interviews and stuff like that. And you're the very
Wow.
first that approach it this way. And I want to know more. Alison, thank
Good.
you so much for coming to Threads of Enlightenment. I deeply
Absolutely.
appreciate this. We're going to provide everything for you guys to get access to her. Everything, man. You're going to need to get access to her because I'm excited. I really am. Because of what she just said, it got me excited because I know there's a lot more there. And so I am going to bring her back. Okay, guys, so that you guys can get more stuff from her. But Alison, for
Now,
this time,
if
thank you.
if I can just add one thing, I just want to tell
Yeah,
everybody, please go to the website, whatever. But anyone who wants to can sign up for free to talk to me for 30 minutes, and I will do everything I can to help you out with your particular situation in 30 minutes, and that is available to anyone. So if you want to talk to me personally, you can do that. All right,
excellent.
that's it.
We're gonna put all of that stuff together for you guys
Okay, great.
again.
Thank you.
Alison, again, thank you so much for coming to Threads of Enlightenment. I deeply appreciate your time and you honored us with both your precious time and your journey. Thank you so
Thank you
much.
so much. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to Threads of Enlightenment with Ken Primus. Hopefully, you're now feeling more empowered to overcome the challenges in your life, whatever they may be. Share that inspiration with others by telling them about this podcast, rating it, and of course, remember to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. For more connection, you can find us on Facebook and Instagram by searching for Threads of Enlightenment. Until next time, stay enlightened.